Good morning and welcome. This is our introduction webinar to some research that we at Bravura Solutions have been working on. And the title for today's webinar is Platform Evolution Through the RDR and Beyond, and Lessons Learned from the UK Experience. And our speakers today are Heather Hopkins. Heather is Managing Director of NextWealth. Kevin Kinton, founder and director of the Collaborative Exchange. Carolyn, Erasmus, country head for South Africa for Bravura. And I'm your host, Emma Napier, and I work in business development at Bravura Solutions too. If we could move over, please, and get started. I wanted to just outline the key points that we're going to cover in this webinar, this presentation. And that is what a platform is. You will hear a number of references to platform. So we're going to explain exactly what a platform is. What is the RDR, the Retail Distribution Review? We're going to cover the fact that there's some crucial times for South Africa following implementation of the recent RDR. We're going to go through how the South African platform landscape is likely to change as a result of RDR. We're going to share useful examples of the decade of RDR experience that we've experienced in the UK. So as we start off, I just wanted to explain a little bit about what a platform is, because there's lots of terms about platform and different people, jurisdictions refer to a platform as something different. So in the UK, we refer to a platform. And in South Africa, there was also the reference to a LISP, which is a linked investment service provider, all of which sits under how we're going to refer to, a number of times today for a platform. So what is a platform? A platform is a piece of technology. It's used by, in this case, advisors, financial advisors, and that is to buy, sell, and hold retail client investments all in one place. Some platforms you will hear are referred to direct-to-consumer platforms, and some are advisor platforms. So that's the two differences of a platform. But today, for the purposes of today, we are going to talk about advisor platforms. Thank you, Clarissa. If you could move to the next slide, please. I'm just going to pass over to Heather, our first speaker from NextWealth, who's going to talk to you about how UK platforms have evolved in the UK since the RDR in 2012. And just to say that all of this webinar is all based on the extensive research that's been conducted on behalf of Bravura, but in collaboration with both NextWealth and the Collaborative Exchange. So over to you, please, Heather.
So as Emma said, my job is to talk about the Retail Distribution Review, or RDR, in the UK and how that's impacted platforms. Just as a bit of a background to what the RDR is, it was implemented in the UK nearly a decade ago. And really what the ambition was of that, what the regulator was trying to do is improve transparency in the investment industry. There was a perception that people didn't really know what they were paying. There was some concern about trust and whether consumers really knew what they were buying and what they were getting for that money. It was also meant to boost professionalism of financial advisors with higher qualifications and standards, and help customers to access unbiased and clearly priced advice and investments. And South Africa is going through a similar exercise, its own retail distribution review. So what can we learn about the impact of the RDR on UK platforms? If we go forward, please, to the next slide. So I'll go through some comparisons before and after, but really, the underlying message is that UK platforms navigated a huge shift from pre-RDR as fund supermarkets. If you think of going to your supermarket and buying, you can buy whatever. In the UK, we always talk about baked beans. You can buy whatever brand of baked beans you want, pulling it off the shelf. But the changes resulted in these platforms becoming very different in terms of how they worked with advisors, and also helped them attract a really large share of assets. So if you look at this image, and hopefully you can read that text, but what if you think about looking at the left-hand side of that screen, what did we have before was, as I mentioned, that term fund supermarket. So it was really a product-centric piece of technology organized for advisors to buy and sell. So it was a really, a place to be able to transact those products. It was paid for by product providers. So the product providers would pay a rebate to the platform, but they would also pay the commission typically to the financial advisor, and the platform sat in the middle, intermediating that. But they were paid by the product providers rather than explicitly by the customer as they are now. The point number 3 there, they facilitated advisor commission payments, and that's really, really important. They still facilitate advisor payments, which we'll talk about in a minute, but it was commission payment before, and that no longer exists in the UK for investment products. Last point, they were sometimes paid by providers to have their products marketed by the platform. So there could be marketing partnerships where a fund group could pay a platform to be able to promote their products and do a roadshow, or do some special marketing through that platform. So if we look forward to where we are today and what happened post RDR, platforms in the UK became, so lists as they're called in South Africa, became referred to as wrap platforms. And what that refers to is the tax wrapper. So the pension wrapper or the ISA wrapper within which funds sit. And the critical role the platform played was providing access to those tax wrappers. They became much more client-centric, helping to manage the full portfolio. So rather than buying a fund on one platform for a client and another platform, that same client, what advisors did was they put their funds onto a single platform per client, and they use that for part of their reporting and all of their analysis of what was happening in that client's portfolio. They really replaced the life offices as the providers of pensions. I mentioned the wrappers, life assurance bonds, and investments. That was a really big shift that happened in the market. And advisors are providing their clients with simplified reporting of their portfolio, tax reportings, all of the preparation for the annual review meetings to review portfolio performance and holdings. That all stems from the platform, which is really the that's the record keeper of where those assets are and how they've performed. They have really rich functionality. That was a big change that happened post RDR. All sorts of tools being added, calculators to help support the financial planning aspects, where financial advisors were becoming more focused on planning rather than advising on product, and the platform supported that transition. And there's a new way for advisors to charge for their service. So most are still charging on an asset-based fee, but some are charging fee-based based on time spent, and platforms are able to support those different methods of charging. So what you can really see is that shift in the way that platforms are supporting advisors becoming focused on their business. And one of the important technology things that are underpinning that is more of a componentized approach through the use of microservices to help firms come to market quickly with new functionality to be able to deliver to particular regulatory changes, or deliver tools and functionality to meet the advisor's business needs. If we can move forward, please. So just to introduce this next section, this shift from transactional fund supermarkets to more holistic wrap platforms that sit at the heart of the advisor's business. So it's really, core to the way they're running their business, fueled this rise of tools that I mentioned, calculators, functionality to support client servicing and compliance reporting, and the expansion of those add-on tools really helped to embed platforms at the heart of advice businesses in their day-to-day operations, and had a really big impact on how they're choosing their platforms. So it impacted on their funds or their platform selection process. So if we look at the next slide, we can look at some research that we prepared for Bravura on the tools that advisors are using. So this was a survey that we did of financial advisors recently, and asked them about the tools that are most important to them. And you can see that performance reporting tools are really important, and that's because that's a core part of what the advisor's doing. Attitude to risk profile is really important as well. On an annual basis, advisors need to be able to say, we did this risk profiling in the fact find and goal assessment. We determined that this was your risk profile. How's that portfolio performing against that? Are we still within your risk profile? CGT calculators can be really important, particularly for assets outside of pension or any other tax wrappers. And that's something that the platforms really struggled to build themselves. So it's important to get those microservice componentized solutions to be able to deliver those CGT calculators. But you can see, there's an even longer list there. There was a roundtable that we hosted recently where a platform boss quipped that the financial advisors want platforms to make them look good in front of clients and to keep them out of jail. And if you look at those different components that they're saying are really important, it really feeds into that looking really good, like you have a professional service in front of your clients, because they tend to be small businesses and advice firms, but also helping them with their compliance and regulatory requirements are really important. If we can move forward to the next slide, please. So the story on the next slide, which I'm sure will come up in a minute, I'll just start introducing that. So a gap really remains in the market in the UK to support the back office of financial planning firms. And this is something that we're still working on as an industry. So just to provide that perspective, it's not all rosy. There are some things that are still being worked on. So the real frustration that still exists is that some of the systems that are fundamental to their business aren't working together. So I talked about the importance of the platform. The back office system is another really important element of the running the operational side of the business. And advisors in the UK talk a lot about the frustration of rekeying information. And really what that's talking about is it can be as simple as, I do a fact find with a client and type in their name and address and all sorts of details. And then I do a cash flow modeling plan and I have to type in all of that information. And then I put it into my back office system and I have to type in all that information. And then I put it onto the platform. And it's the basic stuff of the names, but it's also the funds that are being bought, the amounts that are being bought, and some of the rules about how that's going to be traded. And that can introduce all sorts of risk for error and also just inefficiency. So we do some work looking at satisfaction among advisors of different pieces of tech, and the platforms are the highest rated typically. So advisors are pretty satisfied with their platforms, but the one area of deep frustration across all tech providers is integration with other tech. So you can see that it's about 13% of advisors say that there's poor or not great integration with other tech. The technology that gets the lowest scores is back office systems, where there's a lot of frustration about how they're not really supporting and enabling those firms to offer a modern, forward-facing interaction with their clients. The other last point there is that around the importance of those centrally managed standardized approaches to delivering investment advice. That's become really, really important to firms as they professionalize what they're doing. They standardize so that clients can have a consistent experience coming in. I hope that little ramble through the UK retail distribution review is helpful. And now we'll get the South African perspective from Kevin.
Thank you very much, Heather. And good morning, everybody. Perhaps I should provide a bit of context first before sort of building on the sort of themes that Heather's introduced, is that the South African platform industry is in fact a very mature industry. A lot of people don't know that the industry was founded in about 1981, 1982, I think it was, by an entity called TMA Investment Product Services, or Technical Management Assignment, as you might know, by a chap by the name of Andre Immelman, who wasn't an actuary, but he was in fact emanated from, I think, AA Life or one of those organizations. And he, in fact, constructed an environment where he challenged the very status quo of the life industry in South Africa that dominated the savings and investment market. But the problem was in those days is that if you wanted to invest and you wanted to do it via an organization such as Old Mutual, you could only have Old Mutual as the underlying investment manager on your retirement annuity, for example's sake. And he challenged that, and he said, why should you have to commit a life sentence to one single asset manager? Because we know that asset managers go through cycles and in some terms underperform on a relative basis. And so there were two products that were launched by TMA and an entity called UL Merchant Bank. So the merchant banks effectively disrupted the industry in South Africa, and they launched a thing called the Guaranteed Capital Trust. And what is now mainstream is the concept called a living annuity. And what happened there is that those particular organizations were using Excel spreadsheets to run these particular products, and they realized over time that that was insufficient. And so what you really saw in South Africa is the beginning of the platform industry. So if you look at, if it was developed in sort of 1982, we've really been going for, God, what's that now, 40 years in South Africa. And if you sort of translate that across to the retail distribution review in South Africa, we've really only got stuck into that in 2014. And again, if you look the way which has been driving the behavioral attributes of advisors moving to platforms, it was a function of those things that happened in 1982, where life officers paid commissions, and those commissions were invariably, large sort of annuitized commissions that were paid up front, and it didn't necessarily engender the right advisor-client relationship. So the linked investment industry started facilitating the annuitization of revenues to be paid to them as a consequence of taking incremental payments or annual management fees on the funds that they actually looked after. And that really was the most significant transformation, that you moved from this commission bias, upfronting of commissions, into let's call it an as and when commission payment system, which one hopes is much better aligned with achieving good client outcomes as well. Insofar as the RDR is concerned, I think you all know in South Africa, we're a little bit of a stalemate at the moment. Our first paper was born in about 2014. It's a multi-phased approach of implementation. There's something like 55 interlinked regulatory reforms surrounding that. And there've been regular updates, since then, but very quiet since 2019. I think the FSCA has had its own challenges with resources and otherwise, but we've seen very little progress in the actual implementation. There are lots of things that are still being debated across the industry, and that's the one benefit I think we have in South Africa, that we've learned from the UK's experience. And Heather will tell you that the FCA, Financial Conduct Authority in the UK, has probably made many mistakes in the implementation of their RDR. So I think we have benefit of hindsight of learning from the UK experience and hopefully implementing RDR, which is a sensible proposition that isn't just a regulatory tick box, but in fact serves investors' needs better than what they've been served at the moment. So, I mean, there are lots of different elements of that paper. I'm not going to go into it in any great degree, but I think what you've also seen is that platforms have been lambasted with regulatory reform and tax reform in South Africa. And what you found is that platforms have had to comply with that, and a lot of the development work of platforms has taken place around the regulatory onslaught of making sure that, whether it's Regulation 28 or others, to make sure that they can balance their books and actually account to clients according to ongoing regulatory developments. And so I think what you're seeing in South Africa is we've certainly got a mature industry, lots of local participation. But I think the one thing that's going to be most interesting from here on is that we've got old tech stacks in South Africa. A lot of it, a very complex industry. Lots of platforms have 3,500 funds on their platform. You can think about the corporate action that takes place, the dividends that are paid, the infinite accounting that needs to take place from platforms. So I think a lot of these organizations are now sitting in a situation much like the UK, where they're now having to re-platform. And there are many examples in South Africa. We know of major organizations actually now going through a complete process of bringing in new tech stacks to run their particular business. And quite frankly, that makes sense. Global best practice, all these tax treaty arrangements between different jurisdictions, capital gains tax related issues. Why not implement a solution that is global best practice in South Africa, because we really are part of the international community. And in fact, a lot of our assets are on an ongoing basis externalized out of South Africa. So I think if you look at the industry, there has been some consolidation. And again, if you talk about asset management, we're seeing that happen throughout the world. We've seen an early stage of some of these sort of transactions taking place with the likes of ABSA's decision to ABSA Investment Management, that is, to be integrated into the Sanlam Group. So that's certainly one platform business that will be merged with the Sanlam Glacier platform. But if you look at it, we really dominate in South Africa by 4 big life offices, and because of the Competitions Commission, I doubt very much that we're going to see much more mergers taking place from what is already a very concentrated industry across very few players. That's not to say that our platform industry is only dominated by the life offices. The banks play a significant role in that sphere as well. And there's also third parties, outside of that, that also have a role of playing in the platform market as well. It, however, is very concentrated. We've done a South African platform survey where we surveyed all the major platforms. And if you look at the flow of assets, they're probably set between 4 or 5 players in South Africa, with about 80% of the flows being directed in those particular organizations. So very, very highly concentrated. And Heather would know, and Emma would know particularly well, that scale, this is all about scale. South Africa doesn't have the scale of the European markets. We are kind of subscale in that sense. So it's a challenge for all these platforms that their investment in technology can still deliver a reasonable return to shareholders ultimately. So in my experience, we haven't seen a lot of foreign participants coming in. What we have ever seen, though, is that there are a lot of platforms internationally that advisors are using that don't register themselves in South Africa because they're dealing with hard assets in offshore jurisdictions that are there through allowances and other purposes as well. So definitely a lot of flow into foreign platforms from the South African environment, notwithstanding that a lot of the domestic platforms have entities registered in Guernsey and Jersey and other such jurisdictions to ensure that the follow the client principle actually applies as well. So I think there is a couple of challenges. I think platforms are kind of homogenous in South Africa at the moment. There's not significant points of differentiation. If anything, because platforms are a low margin business for the shareholder and the investment in tech is extreme, that what we're definitely seeing is that more and more platforms are trying to shoe their flow of assets into their own organization, into their own asset management capabilities to try and retain margins. So you're certainly seeing, if platform was a margin of, let's go, 15 basis points, they need to get another 50 basis points into the asset management business. And there's a lot of cross-subsidization, I think, that's happening in organizations at the moment to make sure that they develop their platforms, but they have flow of assets into other components of the organization as time progresses. So I don't think there's, you don't see sort of platforms, straight through processing is big now, obviously digitalization through what we've seen through the lockdown sort of period. There's been a lot of uptake in terms of how consumers are behaving and what their demands are in terms of use of technology. But I don't think there's, that anybody has sort of stepped out of that realm and made it completely seamless, for clients and advisors to interact. It's a challenge to get multiple firms, because most advisors, they don't invest all their money in one platform. They invest in multiple platforms with a single client, and to get that data integrated into one client report is in fact an industry nightmare. So definitely, the point being is that they're looking for opportunities to realize cost savings. The cyber threats, I don't have to tell you. I mean, South Africa is a strong target for that activity, and particularly out in Nigeria, and we see it all the time. We see, certainly, I get letters all the time from my major banks in South Africa that your data has been, in fact, what is the word I'm looking for? It's somebody's got access to your data, and they realize there's been a data breach in the organization, and we see that on a continuum. Our banks with their strong firewalls and all the protection they have, there is still data leakage happening across the industry by and large as well. A major issue in the South African context as well. I think there's a lot of flexibility for resilience for regulatory changes, but again, it's like a bit like a moving target. You can't really adapt your technology to have a clear policy in terms of regulation. And in fact, if anything, we've been sitting in this sort of hollow period since 2014 when the regulatory framework has not been particularly clear, and it doesn't allow you to plan with any kind of certainty as well. So definitely platforms are moving to mass customization, but I think they've still got a long way to go to make sure that the client reporting, the client experience is what one would expect in terms of, the modern era. So that really, I think that really concludes the points I want to put across. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Carolyn.
Thanks very much, Kevin. So the key to taking advantage of the technological opportunities in the competitive market, it's really about, firstly, the firm needs to understand their platform role in the value chain, of how it supports advisors in running their businesses effectively with a future-looking view. And then secondly, it's about them needing to understand the aspects of their solution that actually provides the competitive edge. It's about creating a modular architecture that allows the selection of best-of-breed tech that can integrate into the ecosystem to support automation and reduces the risks of errors. And this really talks to the point that Heather was raising a bit earlier on the rekeying of information. It's about having flexible technology to support propositional changes to keep ahead in the market, as well as your regulatory responsiveness. And you also need to invest in technology that supports speed to market and delivers functionality on a regular cadence without interrupting the platform's business as usual operations. And this introduces the microservices opportunity that also presents itself in the industry. And this is really to deliver specific functionality to any existing platform tech in order to solve discrete challenges or deliver specific tools to advisors. For example, if I refer to some of the tools that Heather was talking about, you can deploy a microservice that enables the platform users to calculate capital gains tax positions for their clients. So the advantage of microservices is also to rapidly solve technology challenges and embrace opportunities in a smart and cost-effective manner, which is also where Kevin was referring to some of the challenges that we face. Thanks. You can move on to the next slide. So in conclusion, following the UK's experience, platforms are playing more of a fundamental role in an advisor's proposition to enable them to deliver client-centric and holistic financial planning. And therefore, there is a clear opportunity for platforms in South Africa that choose to evolve and not only keep pace with your regulatory changes and customer demands, but actually prosper and thrive when creating a fit-for-future platform. Platforms need to be resilient and flexible with a nimble architecture to allow cost-saving initiatives to be realized alongside embracing innovative opportunities. Platforms with good integrations to the other supporting systems and functionality that support advisors in delivering great customer outcomes will take advantage of opportunities in this competitive market. Platforms that get the servicing aspect right, as well as the tech, and as well as providing the best of breed type of tools, really stand to win big in the market as it is gearing up for today and looking into the future. Thanks, Clarissa. I'm going to hand over now to Emma.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Heather, as well. We've come to the end of the presentation, and before I open up to questions, if any of you do have any questions, I haven't noticed anything in the chat. I have been looking, honestly, but if you do have a question, if you could just come off mute or raise your hand or pop it in the chat while I'm doing a bit of a summary here now. But just in conclusion, on top of everything that you've heard this morning, I think it's fair to say that the research that's been done over the space of the last couple of months between NextWealth and the Collaborative Exchange is extensive research. And what we've tried to do is just cobble together everything that's happened in the UK, everything that is happening in South Africa. And a lot of those experiences are experiences that if you are a platform in South Africa today, you can learn from and hopefully supercharge your proposition to be forward thinking. Just based on what Kevin was saying, that platforms in South Africa are actually, it's a mature industry, but the issue is that they're sitting on old tech. Now, Heather, in her presentation, spoke about those microservices, spoke about the research and the surveys with UK advisors, where advisors were saying, actually, we just want some individual tools attached to our platform that allow us to be able to comply with the RDR in the right way. So thinking about integration, thinking about microservices, Carolyn Carolyn spoke just a second ago about one example of that being CGT. And I think the message that we'd like to convey with all of the research at the presentation today is really that the technology is out there. It's alive, it's ready to be installed into South Africa, and hopefully this research will help anyone looking for that advanced technology to supercharge their proposition. And Kevin mentioned that the game is about scale, and we believe that this would give anyone the opportunity to be able to scale and meet that challenge and be the platform of the future. Thank you to the speakers for today. Thank you for the research. Thank you for everything that's been done so far. I think it's exciting, massive opportunities, and we will leave you now to go about your day. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Bye.